Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is Rose MacDonald, who is Japan Country Manager for Wine Australia. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a big wine consumer here in Japan. I'm a big fan of Australian wine. So over the years, I've had a lot to do with Wine Australia, and you guys do a really important piece of work. But, you know, how is it that you came to become the head here in Japan for Wine Australia? You could be in any number of countries around the world, no doubt, but you're here and you're running the operation. Talk a little bit about Wine Australia and what it does, and let's go back and understand how you got to be in this leadership position and other leadership positions you may have had in Japan.
Okay, sure. So Wine Australia empowers the success of Australian wineries. So we do that by investing in research, innovation and adoption, market development, so international and domestic, and also regulatory services. We're based in Adelaide. We've probably got about maybe 80 staff over there. And we have offices in America, in London. We also have a representative in Shanghai and myself here in Japan.
And nowadays, there's how many wineries are there in Australia? Last time I checked, it was about 700-800, but it's probably more than that by now.
More than that, definitely.
What are you up to now?
Can't remember the number off the top of my head. I'm going to say about between 1,000 to 2,000, maybe even a little bit more.
1,000 to 2,000, that's a pretty broad spectrum span there. But there's a lot.
Yes.
There's a lot. Yeah. And they're trying, in many cases, to only serve the domestic market. They're not thinking about export, but you're trying to bring their product into 100%. Foreign countries and create a market for them, I guess.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, market diversification is a big piece for us. Obviously, the wine industry is quite challenging at the moment. So we have a big challenge domestically, but also in international markets, because people aren't drinking as much wine as they used to, or as much alcohol as they used to. So we focus on strategic markets. So that includes Australia, also including Japan, America as well. UK is obviously a big market for us too. So that's a big piece of what we're doing. Yeah.
When I first came here in 1979, I remember I went to Meiji, and there was 2 bottles of Wolf Blass down the very bottom, right on the floor, behind a ladder. French. Everything was French. You know? And the Japanese love affair with French wine was incredible.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken Australian wine a long time to establish a presence overseas, and particularly in Japan. And in your job, I mean, you are really going up against a very strong brand in French wine, but Australia has established a brand for itself, even in Japan, hasn't it?
I believe so. It's still very low market share compared to the old world wine. So you see a lot of French wine, as you say, you see a lot of Italian wine. There's more wine coming in from New World countries, so like California, South Africa. We're probably at about 5% market share for still wine, 6% market share for sparkling. There is, you know, it's still that sort of challenge of being perceived as a supermarket wine. Like you see a lot more in the off-trade than the on-trade. But we have a really nice opportunity in front of us because there's a lot of really high quality, diverse sort of representations of Australian wine coming out of Australia these days. And you're seeing more and more interest from Japanese sommeliers picking it up, really wanting to serve it in, you know, on-premise, high-class establishments. And it's quite interesting because you have that sort of classic representation, and then you've got a lot of contemporary styles coming out of Australia these days too.
One thing I like about Australian wine is it's no cork. So there's no cork taint, no degradation of the quality of the wine through the cork going off. And also it tells you on the bottle what you're drinking.
That's it.
It says this is a Chardonnay, or this is a Sauvignon Blanc, or this is a Shiraz, or whatever. So for someone like me who's not that well educated on wines, but I know sort of wine styles that I like, that's handy for someone like me to know, well, I like a particular type of style of wine, and I can identify on the bottle what it is. I may not know the winery, I may not know if it's any good or not, but I basically exclusively only drink Australian wine in Japan because it's just too mind-boggling to understand all these other countries' wines, just concentrate on one. But invariably, it's rare that I come across a bad one for my taste. You know, it's rare that I come across one and go, oh, that's not very good, you know, but they're generally pretty even quality, I think. I feel anyway.
Yeah.
So good on you for doing the job you do. And so How is it that you're in Japan? Why are you in Japan? Why aren't you in Shanghai or States or somewhere else? Why Japan? Why you?
It was a bit of chance originally, but I've been here 10 years now. So I started studying Japanese at university when I was about 21, 22. I studied for 1 year in Australia, and I knew if I didn't come over here, I would never, really improve. So I did a year of exchange at Sophia University.
Oh, I went to Sophia too.
Oh, are you?
So which Aussie university did you study at?
Wollongong.
Wollongong?
Yep.
Okay, the gong.
From Wollongong originally.
The famous gong, right?
Yeah.
And so a year at Daiichi. Yeah. I was at Daiichi too when I first came here to study Japanese.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Did you do the intensive course in the morning, 3 hours, just full on?
Yep.
It's great. It's really good.
Yep. Extremely tough, as I remember. And so you come on an exchange program, you complete that, you go back to the Wollongong University to complete your degree?
That's it. So I did Japanese and International Business, so BA BCom. I knew that just a language by itself wouldn't be so competitive. So I graduated maybe in about 4 years. And then I still didn't feel like my Japanese was conversational enough. I had the academic sort of side down, knew all the sort of keigo, had a really good grounding in kanji, but I still felt that if I went to an izakaya or if I was in a business meeting, I wouldn't really be able to hold down my
They
own.
don't really cover, one semester module on izakaya Japanese
That's it.
business meeting Japanese. So you wanted to do more, so how did you do more?
So I applied for a working holiday and I came over and I did 18 months. So I knew that if I were going to stay in Tokyo, I'd end up using English. So I went, where did I go originally? I did some woofing, which was working on organic farms. So I went down to Kyushu, worked around sort of Fukuoka area for a little bit. I went to Tanegashima. So I was surfing at that time, good waves in Tanegashima, and I was working at a sweet potato and like rakkyo sort of organization or a farm, just a homestay essentially. Worked there for a couple of months, started to run out of money, went down to Okinawa, worked in a resort, did a ski season in Hakuba and went back down to Okinawa after that. So that was a great.
So do you
sort of
speak any
grounding.
Okinawan? Like chaganju?
I can understand it when I was
Haisai, this type
there
of thing, yeah.
a little bit. One thing that was really great about Okinawa was there were so many people from all over Japan. There were lots of people from Aichi, there was lots of people from Osaka, lots of people from Okinawa as well, like kind of working there. There was a lot of people from Nepal as well, which was interesting at the time. I was staying at a ryo originally with a lot of other foreigners who had come down to work. And it was really fun lifestyle. And it was great sort of training because you're just saying the same thing again and again and again every day. And that really sort of helps you to ground down those basics so that you're able to really kind of build on your Japanese. So it was a really great experience.
And so how long were you in Okinawa altogether?
Altogether 12 months.
12 months, right?
Yep.
And then what happens?
When I finished up in Okinawa, I went back to Australia, worked for a little while in another industry. And then I was approached by Pernod Ricard, which is a big alcohol company, because they needed a wine ambassador in Japan who spoke Japanese.
So you were in the wine industry down there. So here's a question. You're not from, well, I guess, New South Wales, you've got quite a big wine producing area there, but you're not necessarily in the wine industry. So you go into it as a choice. What made you go into that industry? You could have chosen, I'm sure, many things to do with Japan or whatever, but why that one?
It was a comfortable industry for me to go into. I had worked in bars all through university. I was very comfortable in bars, very comfortable in hospitality. I had a basic knowledge just from that sort of bar experience. And then I would be based in Tokyo. And it was that really sort of dream position where I could do two things I loved, which I really enjoyed working about wine. I really enjoyed working in Japan. I was coming in, being paid on an Australian salary, which is great, and then working in Japan.
So, but what I'm getting at is prior to Pernod Ricard offering you that position as a wine ambassador, you are working in the wine industry.
I was outside of the industry.
You're outside the industry? Oh, okay. So what were you doing outside the industry?
Something completely unrelated. I was working in like a data center at the time.
That sounds absolutely boring.
Yeah.
So you're slaving away in the data center.
Yeah.
And how on earth does Pernod Ricard find you to get you to Japan as a wine ambassador? How on earth does that come together?
It was LinkedIn, and I had my previous employment history in Japan linked onto my LinkedIn. I had my university and I had my degree information on there. So I suppose...
Boy, LinkedIn's really powering for Pernod Ricard to find you just through LinkedIn. That's amazing. Were they looking for someone Australian in particular?
Well, they had wine brands from different countries. The wine brands that I was representing in that role were from New Zealand, Spain, and Australia. I think it helps that I was Australian.
Right.
But more than that, they needed someone who spoke Japanese.
Right.
And I had that background.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The data centre's loss is Pernod Ricard's gain. And so what were you doing as a wine ambassador? That sounds swilling wine every day. Sounds like sort of a job from heaven. Sounds pretty good.
It was pretty great. I was very lucky that I was in the first sort of wave of recruitment for that role. And I was training with wine ambassadors who were going to other different markets. And they put us through a 9-month training program. So
here in Tokyo?
In the wine homes or the brand homes. So I did six weeks maybe in Barossa Valley. I went over and did the same in Marlborough, all during vintage. We did some training in Sydney and the head office.
6 months in the Barossa Valley, then to New Zealand.
Marlborough.
Marlborough there, and then?
Sydney.
So
training in sort of like, let's say the sales and the marketing, all those sort of areas. And then finally we went to Spain, to La Rioja, which it was a very nice training period. And it was great to really get that really, really in-depth knowledge about wine. And I think when someone comes to Japan, and I know this was a request from the office at the time, they're like, you need to have very, very good wine knowledge to come up here. Because to talk to the trade, to talk to sommeliers, to talk to people who their entire career is about wine, you need to know what you're talking about.
And particularly too, Japanese are really detail-oriented, and they love the data, they love the detail. And so they just suck that stuff straight up. So if you come in, you don't know it, they're going to know straight away.
That's it. And the beauty of having that real experience is I would be thrown random questions all the time and you know the answer because you've been there and you've done it and you have that sort of base knowledge. And having...
You felt they were testing you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in most industries they will, but...
Is this a blonde thing as a disadvantage?
I don't know yet. We'll see. Yeah.
So you do that with Pernod Ricard for how long?
So that role was 3 years, and then I was lucky enough to get a position within Pernod Ricard Japan, so I switched to the market company. Then I was brand manager for Irish whiskey, Jameson and Redbreast. That was probably about 2 or 3 years, switched over to white spirits, so tequila, some of the liqueurs. What else was there? Gin. Gin was very, very happening at the time. So over to gin. And then
in this role, are you someone who is leading a team of other people, or you are in the team? Or?
Yeah, so I was a brand manager. I worked my way up from assistant brand manager to brand manager. And I was always managing ambassadors, generally 1 to 3 people, a mix between international people and local Japanese staff.
Right. So you have had nothing in your training or development around leading people. Do they give you anything around being a leader? Do they give any help around training around that side of things?
A little bit. A lot of it was really practical.
Was it?
Practical experience, talking to other people within the company, other managers, observing how they lead. It was a sort of unique position for ambassadors as well, because you're kind of coming over, you're working in irregular hours, and then you're using a mix of Japanese and English. You're really quite reactive to what's going on in the market, and then you're working a lot across different sort of sales teams or with the marketing, etc. So I really kind of picked up a lot just watching what other people were doing. All the people I was managing were really very different people as well. So I tried to find what will work for that person, tried to understand what that person wanted to achieve by being in Japan. Some people were just here for a short stint. Other people wanted to be here for a longer time and live in Japan forever. So it was really about getting to know who those people were, what they wanted to achieve, and to see how I could support them in their role. Yeah.
And now with... how many years in Pernod Ricard altogether?
That was 7 years.
7 altogether, right?
Yeah.
And then you jump out of that into Wine Australia?
That's right.
Right, okay. And I guess Wine Australia is a pretty small organisation in Japan.
Yeah. At the moment, there's just me.
Just you?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not having to lead anyone. So let's talk about your Pernod Ricard years, your 7 years there, as you moved up into leadership positions. So as you say, you had people from different countries, different backgrounds,
Yeah.
different aspirations,
Yeah.
different interests, and you're trying to lead them and you're observing things. What did you find worked well for them to follow you? Because you're relatively young, you're Australian, you're not Japanese, you're female, you know. So there's a lot of, in the sort of hierarchy of things here, things not necessarily in your favour. So how did you go about getting them to be engaged about following your lead?
Yeah.
What worked for you?
I really think having a clear objective was number one. Because if you don't know what you're all there to achieve, then everyone goes out in different directions. There's all different interpretations. Usually the ambassadors were being sent from a brand owner. So the brand owner would have their own objectives for this ambassador to achieve. And then when you're working with the market company, they also have a set of objectives. So there can be a little bit of ambiguity about, you know, what's the real purpose? How are you going to achieve anything? How are you going to make any real difference? I think kind of sitting down and having that really clear strategy. So I was a brand manager, so I was in charge of the strategy of the brand, but also how did the ambassador's role fit into that strategy? And then how could I support them to kind of make that happen? And that often involved, you know, talking to sales teams or talking to trade marketing teams, you know, having sort of collateral material that's ready for the ambassadors to use. And really being kind of there as a support for the ambassadors, because it can be challenging when you first come to market. Maybe you speak a lot of Japanese, maybe you don't speak that much Japanese, you don't have any contacts in the industry, you don't really understand the industry. There's all that sort of education and training at the beginning to really make someone feel comfortable, give them the tools that they need to succeed. It was really kind of having that really clear plan, and then being able to work with an ambassador so that they could achieve what they wanted to achieve within that plan. For example, some ambassadors may have been really digitally strong, or they may have been into photography. So they were really, really a great support when we were creating digital assets or we were working with social media. Other people may have been more stronger in events, so they would be often talking to bartenders and helping on the event side. Some people were really good at building relationships, so that's kind of where we focused the power. So it was really kind of getting to know what their strengths were. And helping them to feel they could use those strengths in the context of being an ambassador, if that makes sense.
And in terms of the wine industry is dominated by France, no question about that.
Yeah.
And the French, you know, they are tremendously powerful and well organised. I went to a Japan sommeliers event when I was working for the embassy up here. When I was with Austrade, and it just blew me away. They had people running around with these velvet cloaks, and these sort of rods are made out of the root or the branch of a wine plant, a grape plant, and they had these sashes and people with, you know, the full chef's white hats with big sashes and giving out honorary sommelier titles to VIPs and celebrities and whatever, and had this whole ceremony. And I'm looking at this going, my God, the French, and certificates, of course, big certificates with lots of gold on them. And, you know, Japanese love uniforms. They love formality. They love ceremony. And I just thought, wow, the French have absolutely nailed this, you know. They've just realised either they do it themselves naturally and it just happens to sync with the Japanese psyche, or they've looked at Japan and said, right, let's get out the velvet cloaks and the, I don't even know what you even call those damn things with the big vine. It comes with the vine there.
Like a staff or...
Staff, or I don't know what the hell it's called. But, and let's start handing out honorary sommelier titles to VIPs and celebrities and whatever. Pretty hard nut to crack, I think, for competitors. You know, so you need to have ideas around that. I mean, Pernod Ricard, you've got a lot of different brands, right? But the point I'm getting at is you've got to have creativity in a crowded market, in a very highly competitive market. And you and I can individually be quite creative, perhaps, or be quite, you know, capable in that regard. But we're one person. And when you're the boss, you're still no matter how awesome we might be, we're still one person, you know. So you need the team, you know. You need the team to come up with ideas and think of ways of doing things from a different angle, get another capture of market or capture of attention, or get some angle going. What did you find worked well to get people to come up with ideas on their side and bring them to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll answer maybe in the context of wine, just following that. So even though I'm not leading a team, I'm leading projects. So we have a very clear strategy in Japan, which is to increase the demand and premium for Australian wine. We have activities to achieve that.
Now, a premium in that sense, what are we talking? We're talking 5,000 yen a bottle, 10,000 yen a bottle? What are we talking?
Technically, by IWSR, we define it as over 1,500, but really it's more sort of around 3,000, 4,000.
Well, you know, I'm biased because I'm Australian. I'm biased because I like Australian wine, but you buy 3,000-4,000 yen bottle of wine from Australia here, it's very good. Like the cost performance.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's unbeatable, but it's very strong. So that's quite a good wine for that price, which maybe you might have to pay, I don't know, maybe 10,000 yen to get the equivalent French wine. Yeah. All the French people out there, sorry. You don't like to hear that. But I think it's true, you know, when I compare. So that's interesting. So it's not like a 50,000 yen wine or something really extraordinary. It's quite affordable, I would say.
Yeah. I think when you talk to the importers, they really say, you know, we want to sell wine that's around 3,000, 4,000 yen. What a customer will pay for Australian wine may be a different story, but that's really sort of the ballpark they want to be playing in because, as you say, the cost performance is incredible. And one thing that you can really use as a selling point is the quality is always there. As you mentioned, we're very rarely under cork. You can be pretty much guaranteed there's no sort of bouchonnet going on with the wine. When you buy it, you're going to be able to drink it. You don't have to worry about corkage or bouchonnet. As a result of the cork. So there's a really great sort of trusting quality and people are knowing that it's coming from a very pristine sort of environment, Australia being so isolated. So you have those really great selling points.
Also, I don't think Japan has the custom of laying wines down.
No.
Like I remember when I was in Osaka, I was a consul general in Osaka and senior trade commissioner, and there was a consular community down there. At one point, I was the dean of the consular corps, and I remember talking to the guy from Belgium, I think it was, Belgium, and he wouldn't consume wine. He would buy wine and lay it down for like 15 years or something, and then over a period of time open up. So there's always a constant buying and laying down. And growing up in Australia, I don't know anybody who ever did that because Australia tended to be, I think the time between purchase and consumption is a really, really short time frame. And I think Japan's like that too. People are not laying the wine down for long periods of time. They're buying it and consuming it. I think possibly Australian wine lends itself to that. Maybe the nature of the wine is quite good that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there's a few Australian wineries that'll hold wines back until they're ready to sell.
So maybe, for example.
Exactly. And I do have some Japanese friends who do have wine cellars at home, but of course everyone's apartment's so small.
Tiny, right?
Where are you going to put it?
You know, where do you put it, right?
That's it. Yeah.
So coming back to the idea about creativity and getting ideas out of people, be it through the work you're doing now with wineries and projects, or be it when you were Pernod Ricard, what things you found worked well?
When I first came into the role, what I really did was research, essentially. I spent about 2 or 3 months talking to people. So when I say talking to people, I surveyed the importers. I was talking to them face to face, really understanding what's working, what's not. I was talking to the embassy, who are great support. We often collaborate on events and activities together. I was talking to the different state offices, and that was a really nice sort of groundwork, in addition to some data that we had to kind of see, okay, where is the opportunities? Where are the threats? Okay, if we know we want to go in this direction, how do we achieve that? So we kind of identified the framework with which to form those ideas. And I came up with maybe about 10 different ideas that I wanted to try out. I needed to kind of check that with the office in Adelaide and then sort of check that with importers. And I kind of ran these ideas around all of these stakeholders, because you're leading a project, but no one is actually like within your team. except for everyone in Adelaide, of course. But I needed to create something that was attractive for these stakeholders. So they might want to collaborate with us, or they might want to work with us. So it was really that sort of consensus building where I had these ideas, I'll get this feedback, we'll develop it a little bit more. I would be very transparent and just say, look, this is what we want to do. Do you think it'll work? Is there any way that we can improve it to make it better? Have you had any learnings that we could maybe apply to this to make it even better? Is there a way that we could, for example, in the state perspective, is there a way that we can make this more attractive for you to help promote wines from your state? And that was kind of the process that I followed. With the stakeholders, the Japanese are almost, the importers are almost exclusively Japanese. Whereas the state officers are Australian. So it was interesting because you had those two sort of perspectives coming in. And that's kind of how I built that sort of creative brainstorming. And then it came into the testing stage. When I first came into the role, I was very aware that to build trust, I needed to put my money where my mouth is. There had to be action. It couldn't just be words. So from that, initial sort of research stage, that consensus building, really kind of like tailoring, continuously improving that idea to roll out. I think the first activity we went live with about five months after I came in, maybe 6 months. And we have, kind of continually evolved our calendar of activities to be consistent each year, because that gives importers kind of the stability that they want. They want to know that there's a certain set of activities each year that they can build their ideas around, or their activities around. But it also meant that I could kind of go back quite regularly and just say, look, is this working for you? Is there anything you want to see? Is there anything more that you want to see? Is there anything that's not working that we can kind of fix? And through that, we've been able to be more creative and kind of expand out each year and try something new each year to make things a little bit better and a bit more effective, more impactful, I think you could say.
I think for the trade, particularly for restaurants, there are, if they're competing with other restaurants. And Australia has got quite specific wines that are not necessarily available to their competitors. And so if they decide to take on those wines, they can get a very high quality wine at a very competitive price and be differentiated from everyone else. So I always thought that there was an opportunity for Australia in terms of exporting to that. But they're individual restaurants. So you're looking for someone who owns maybe 2 or 3 restaurants. So there's some degree of quantity to make that work. So in terms of what sort of feedback do you get from the trade side? Because in a way, they may be, I'm not in your job, so I don't know, but I imagine they're in a sort of prism where they see things in a certain way, but you may have a broader vision than what's possible that they're seeing, and be able to introduce them to other ideas like that. How do you go about convincing them to try something new? Because new is not always necessarily the easiest thing to sell in Japan, right? The same try, we did this last year, exactly the same thing, we'll do it exactly the same way, good. We're going to try something different. Not so sure about that. So how do you convince people to you talk about trust, right? To have the trust to let you suggest something new.
It's, I think, to really kind of open that discussion. First of all, everyone's different. I think often we're very much taught in Japan, everything's the same, everything's very homogenous. My experience of working with the trade, it is really different because you've kind of got a whole segment of outlets that are very price-based, and they'll look at nothing but the price. Then you've got restaurant groups, then you've got kind of the mid sort of range of restaurants, you've got washoku places, you have your izakaya, more like the higher end izakaya, you've got sort of Western restaurants in there. Some will be very resistant to change. They only want French wine or they only want old world wine. Some are a little bit more flexible, but they're still quite limited in what they want, in which case they kind of would more go for the classic varieties of Australian wine and what sells, what their customers may know. Then you've got more the kind of outgoing sort of restaurants, or the more, I guess you could say, innovative. Perhaps they've got a sommelier on staff who's really fascinated by New World wines. Maybe they spent time in Australia. I meet more and more younger sommeliers these days who are going over to Australia on working holiday and coming back. So there's people who actually have living experience in Australia and come back and go, wow, this is really cool. I would love to introduce a wine from this winery over here or this winery here. So often the conversation changes because Wine Australia is more a category piece. We're promoting Australian wine as a whole. It's not so much brand to brand. So I'm not so much in the commercial discussion end of things. We're more sort of education and marketing. But I really always enjoy, like when you're talking to sommeliers, having like jitsure, like for example, case studies that worked in other places, and you can say, look, I saw this great promotion in London, or I saw this great promotion in Sydney. This was really, really cool. Would you ever consider doing something like this? For example, it's been a little bit of a trend, say, for example, in Melbourne, when you're doing wine pairing, not just doing a white and then a red, but doing a white and red at the same time. And then you're doing the nomi karabe, you're doing the tasting comparatively. And when you introduce that sort of concept to, let's say, a more forward-thinking restaurant here, they're like, oh, that's really cool. I've never seen anything like that. That could be a way to kind of get customers to come in or to introduce our outlet to new customers. I think at the end of the day, businesses, they're businesses. They always want to see shukyaku. They always want to see a way to get customers in the door. They always want to see a way that they can sell more wine. So if you can introduce, I guess, tools or sort of jitsure examples that can provide them benefit, I use the concept, or I use the phrase win-win so much because it works in Japanese and English, right? So if there's a win-win where, we're introducing something really cool, you're getting great sales out of it, you're getting customers through the door, maybe we can help share that news through our digital network. We can share it on Instagram, we can share it via EDM to all of our contacts. There's a way that we can really promote and work together to create this win-win situation. That's usually how I'm kind of coming into that conversation and then tailoring it depending on what the business needs are.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Leading is easy. Getting people to follow is the hard part. That is a great quote from Yogi Berra. Surprisingly, despite the complexities of leading here in Japan, everyone has to work it out by themselves. Foreign leaders want practical, applicable, expert advice. This is now available for the first time in history. Grab your copy of Japan Leadership Mastery on Amazon today and avoid the mystery, trial and error, especially the errors. So imagine your promotional budget is not massive,
Oh no.
for Japan. So you're up against some pretty deep pockets from your competitors, I imagine.
Yeah.
So building trust with buyers here is going to be absolutely crucial. What have you found works well to build trust with buyers here?
Probably.
You can't just buy your way into the trust either because you don't have the money to do that. It's got to be something else, isn't it?
That's it. For me, probably the biggest audience is the importers, buying the trust of the importers, and trying to create an activity calendar where they can utilize that as a tool to sell their own Australian wines. We have, at the moment, I think at least sort of 50 importers that are selling Australian wines, and they're all quite different. You kind of have ones that are focusing on a more classic range. You have some that only have one winery. You have some that are exclusively Australian or maybe Australian and New Zealand wines. Then you have some that are focusing on sort of new wave wines and natural wines. So I need to kind of focus on something that will create a tool that everyone can use. To give you an example of that, recently we launched a restaurant campaign. Well, I say recently, we're just about to go in our 3rd edition. And that was a tool where people could go, or the importers could go out to their customers and say, look, there's a restaurant campaign that Wine Australia is doing. It's 2 months. If you sign up, you'll be included in the press release. They'll provide these promotional tools, so whether it be like table tents or posters, there's visibility tools that you can use to communicate it to your customers. And the person with, or the outlet with, we use different measurables, but usually it's about volume or about value. Whoever sells the most wine in terms of bottle number or RSP, they win a trip to Australia.
Okay.
So we did that. We've done that once, and there were 2 winners. And we've done it a second time, and there were 3 winners. So we'll take those 3 winners to Australia in May. So that's kind of what we do to support the importers to use as a tool to sell more Australian wine and propose more Australian wine to outlets. Yeah.
Years ago, I did a thing called New Australian Cuisine.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The concept was that we had a lot of tourists going down to Australia, eating very bad food and drinking very bad wine down there because they're on these tour groups.
Yeah.
And, they're sort of being steered towards certain places for the most part.
Yeah.
And I had the idea that, if we introduced Japanese tourists to high-quality wines, high-quality food, high-quality restaurants, it'd change the concept about Australia, because when you come back here, if you've had a fairly mediocre eating experience in Australia through the tour that you're on, and you see Australian produce in the supermarkets or whatever, you're not particularly motivated to go and buy it because your memory is average. But if you've had a really major experience, you go, oh, Australia, great, you have a positive idea. That was the idea. So we took journalists down to Australia. We had chefs come up here. We were trying to give it both on the food and the wine side, a lot more profiled, again, to compete, and trying to find something innovative that would make Australia step out a little bit. In terms of, other things you found to build trust, because that didn't have a lot of money behind it, but it did have some money behind it. So it had some oomph, and it got a lot of coverage. So we could expand the range. And as you know, in Japan, if they read about it in the media, it has a real impact. Real impact, maybe more so than in Australia. So if you can actually get that stuff in front of the media and get them to produce it, then people will go. And if the restaurants are there, or if the importers are noted or whatever, it seems to have a ripple effect as well. So in terms of other things you've found to build trust with the industry at different layers, particularly maybe around the media, that works for you, because that's a real amplifier for the key messages. Isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think kind of to pull that all into one word, it's it's advocacy. If you can get advocacy from the local media and from local sommeliers, it does a huge thing to raise the reputation of wine in the market. We took Vogue Japan over to Australia maybe about 18 months ago. And that was amazing because we could really show the premium way that wine and food is served together, and we could show the diversity both of the wine and the cuisine. Because I think in Australia, from the Japan side, it's really hard to imagine what is Australian food until you go there. Is it steak and free veg or what does it look like? But it really is quite a fusion, and that's a power of the diversity of people in Australia. Introducing that kind of diversity and the quality that came together, as well as the presentation. And it was always in really beautiful scenery. I think, if you go to a wine region, it's always like really gorgeous outlooks, really beautiful restaurants, really wonderful selections of wine that you can taste. So that was a really great thing to introduce Vogue to. But I really loved how the writer wrote about her experience, because she wrote about it from a very Japanese perspective, that if you or I were to write an article, we just wouldn't look at it in that way. And she wrote it in a way that was quite convincing, I think, to readers. And that was a really great thing. We also were very, very lucky to have Wands come and visit us during our annual tasting. So they came out and they did a December release about Australian wine, and it was something like 13 pages, 16 pages, and it focused on sort of what the activities were. It also kind of went out and interviewed some restaurants that had Australian wine in their lineup. It talked about different trends. They have a Japanese writer in Australia that kind of reported back on what's happening on the ground there. And that was a really lovely piece as well, because you've got the data side of things, and then you've got these jitsure of these sort of restaurants that are using Australian wine, who are all quite unique. And then you've got all the activities going on. So it's really quite convincing, I think, if you're a trade and reading it and going, oh, this is actually something I can think about, or actually I'm quite intrigued about Pinot Noir, like Pinot Noir from Australia. Where's that coming from? Is it Wellington Peninsula? Is it Tasmania? People can start to think, oh, there's things that I can consider for me there. So it's very convincing. Yeah.
Australia's a huge country too. If you think about it, you put an overlap map of Australia on Europe.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
It's as big as
It
Europe, you
fits.
know. So if you think about all the different wine producing areas in Europe as
Yeah.
a total, Australia encompasses all of those actually
it.
in terms of climate, although it's warming up everywhere. In terms of, I talked about New Australian Cuisine. We had Prime Minister Paul Keating launch that.
Oh, really?
We
Wow.
launched that here in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Neil Perry came up. He
Yeah.
provided the food. We had the wine matching with it. Again, you're trying to get the oomph, you know, to get the media coverage to really push it along. And those sort of things build a lot of trust and momentum, but very hard to keep them going, you know. And so in terms of, what about culture? In the sense of, when people think about Australia, they think of a very informal, laid-back, friendly, relaxed country, which it is. But it also has, as you say, some really incredible restaurants, some really high-quality food, a fusion cuisine between sort of Mediterranean cooking, Asian flavours, and then high-quality food. And if you look at things like Gourmet Traveller, you look at the recipes, the number of Japanese terms that I see these days in some of those recipes is incredible. It's like, wow, you know, Japan's sort of taking over the world in a way. So there's a lot of things there in terms of bringing out the culture. Anything you found works well in using culture as a leverage point or as a means of introducing the product or introducing the concepts?
Yeah, it's funny when I talk to people who are about over 50, maybe 50, 60, and I mention I'm Australian, often they're like, oh, great, I went to Australia on my honeymoon.
Yeah, okay.
And then if I talk to someone who's maybe about 40 or so, they're like, oh, yeah, I went there on exchange when I was 12 or 13, maybe to the Gold Coast. When I talk to people maybe about sort of 20 or 30, they're going over on working holiday. So you can kind of see like a different experience through the sort of generations or the ages. And I think right now is really interesting because you've got so much travel between the two countries. You've got tons of Australians coming over here, obviously. You see,
here we are.
That's it.
We're here.
That's it. Everyone's here for the
time.
snow as well. And I think a lot of people really, really enjoy coming here, and the food is so great and everyone goes back and raves about the food. And then I meet a lot of people that go from Japan over to Australia, not just to study English or to go to university. I know a lot of people who went over there for windsurfing or to just go over for surfing, maybe to work on farms. I've met a couple of people who have worked in wineries as well. So you have that really nice sort of exchange of culture going back and forth. And I think those younger people that go over and experience actually living there and learning the language and really, I guess, absorbing that living in another country, not just visiting in another country. I think that's quite powerful. And I do see those people going into the wine industry here in Japan, which is great because that's how you build long-term relationships, and it's how you build like an understanding for each other's country, which is great.
Yeah, you're right about the Japanese young people who are going there are making a lot of money, and that becomes a bit of a magnifier too for interest, because they realise I can go down there, working holiday, make a lot more money. Like I was watching something on TikTok the other day. I come from Brisbane. Some guy in Brisbane started a company called Get Ahead, and it's like a Tinder for work. And they go around interviewing people in the street. What do you do? How much do you make?
Yeah.
And a lot of people working part-time. And I'm like, people, I make $40 an hour. I make $35 an hour. I make $29 an hour. And I was sitting there listening to this going, my God, because it's almost Australian dollar, Japanese yen is almost pretty close to parity at different times, right?
That's it.
No one here is making that sort of dough on a part-time basis in terms of what they're going to earn. And the exchange rate is now, you're not losing much on the exchange rate. So that's a big draw card. So I'm just wondering whether you can amplify that to get more of them going down there, fall in love with Australia and become ambassadors for Australia when they come back. But if you're going to give advice to someone on thinking about how to be successful in Japan, leading, be it leading staff, be it leading stakeholders, leading projects or whatever, what advice would you give them?
I would really say, number one, be prepared. because you're coming into a different work culture. I think there's a lot of differences between Australia and Japan in terms of work culture. I mean, you've got hierarchical, non-hierarchical, you've got individualistic versus collective. You've got kind of detail-orientated versus big picture as well. There's all those things that you learn in the textbook, right? Like before you come over. But I think, one, you've got to be prepared. But when you get here, you need to be flexible and open enough to be able to adapt to that working culture. I heard someone else in one of your podcasts say, be curious. And I think that was really good advice, because when you can go into an organization working here in Japan, leading a team, it's so important just to ask lots of questions, really understand where you are, ask lots of questions, what's this business about? What are these people's roles? What's working? What's not working? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? One of the great things about being curious as well is you can ask and learn about the organization in a way that's not threatening. You're showing that you're interested, you're showing you're committed. It's not judgmental, it's not critical, you're just learning about things. I think the second part of that would be don't make assumptions. And I can tell you one assumption I made, which was wrong. So I had always learned, it's very top-down sort of culture, right? And I think in the day-to-day that can kind of come through, and I certainly observed that in a working space. But this decision-making by consensus is very, very powerful. And I think when you're leading a team, that can be the difference between your project being a success or not being a success, or whatever you're working or not. Because when you're building or going to a decision by consensus, you're really learning what, for example, like if you're maybe leading a sales team, they're talking to the customer every day. They will know what the customer will accept. They will know what the customer won't accept. They will know what the customer likes, and they'll have a good idea of what they've been complaining about, maybe some of their pain points. So by working with the team to come to a decision and kind of, shop working that idea, it can be really, really powerful. It's not just a checkbox sort of exercise. My other idea, like if you wanted to, kind of come to Japan and you're working here and you want to be open and flexible, it's really about signaling that you're open as well. These little day-to-day sort of interactions in the office, and maybe aisatsu, really making sure that you're greeting people properly, taking the time to have a chat to people. When I meet people, I always try to speak first, and I try to use English and Japanese. So straight away I'm like, okay, hi, how's it going? People can choose whichever language they want to reply to me in. So I try to make it comfortable, and people can talk to me in whatever language makes them feel comfortable. And I think signaling that you're open will just make other people feel more comfortable around you. And that makes it easier to kind of lead the team as well, from my perspective.
So should they learn Japanese?
It's a good question. I guess it depends what organization you're going into. I guess from my perspective, obviously English is more comfortable. And some people want to learn English in Japan. So I have worked with people in Japan who prefer to use English. On the flip side, in Japanese, you can speak to anyone. And I think a lot of people who don't speak English here appreciate that you have gone to the effort of actually learning Japanese, you know what I mean? But of course, as a leader, and particularly if you're going to be in that sort of role, if you're using Japanese all the time, it increases the chance of you misunderstanding something because it's not your native language. I think you just need to pick what works best. For me, I felt like I wanted to learn, I needed to learn, and I do believe it's helped because I can relate to people very easily. It's quite easy to communicate. I don't have that barrier between communication, and that's been very helpful in a leadership position because you can understand people without any sort of interpretation or misinterpretation.
One of the things that people bump into is speed, because often they're sent here with a task to produce some numbers or some results or something tangible. And of course, when you get here, no one here is thinking about speed.
No.
They're thinking about risk aversion and risk reduction, and speed is the antithesis of that because speedy things can go wrong or get you into trouble. So you have this balance of being a leader here to try and deal with headquarters who's driving you for results, and then you're trying to deal with the local situation which is not driving for speed and actually trying to slow things down. And I'm sure you must have had this in your experience with Pernod Ricard and also with Wine Australia, that expectations about how things are going to go in Japan and how fast they're going to happen are quite high.
Mm-hmm.
But on the ground, the people you're dealing with are not particularly interested in going particularly faster. They're more interested in going safer.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be your advice on how to grapple with those two sort of semi-conflicting, possibly conflicting attributes?
It's a very familiar situation. I think a clear objective is very key. Let's say, for example, if we're talking about there's a volume objective, let's say 5,000 9-litre case, we want to increase sales by that amount. I think that objective needs to be clear. Then it's a consensus building. It's very much having an organised team put together. It needs to be very clear who does what within the team. And then you go through the discussions and you say, okay, look, this is our objective. There's many ways that we can get there. How do we get there? What's the right way to get there? Let's say if it was a wine product or let's say an alcohol product and you need to get there, you would be, talking to trade marketing, you would be talking to sales, you would be talking to the off-trade division, the on-trade division, you'd be talking to EC, you would be maybe talking to the analysts, the insights team as well to make sure that you have accurate data. You would spend all that time building consensus, getting the key information, building consensus. Maybe you put together plan A and you talk about plan A, and then maybe you define it a little bit better, or maybe you revise it a little bit, and you gradually put this sort of plan together, and then you come into that action sort of stage, right? I think there's that consensus stage, and once everyone's signed off, it's quite quick from there. And I think maybe you talk to other people who find the same experience, like that conception stage and that brainstorming and that consensus building, that takes the most time. But then you've got buy-in. You've got buy-in from everyone. You've got maybe the sales leaders who will put this out to their team, and it's like, okay, this person is responsible for X amount of volume. This person is responsible for X amount of volume. It's then very easy for them to delegate if it's nice and clear. I do believe that if you're the leader, you have to take on that leadership role. You should be the one driving the momentum. You should be the one controlling the timeline. You should be the one checking up, making sure everyone's got enough time to do the activity to start off with, is reporting on time. And I think this is very important, but you need to take the responsibility of the risk. People should be feeling in a safe environment where they can put forward ideas, they can put forward maybe hypotheses, maybe this could work or maybe this doesn't work very well. You want people to feel safe to go out of their comfort zone a little bit, and you do that by taking on the risk. When I say risk, it's mitigated risk. It's not just, out there risk. It's very considered risk.
Blow up the company risk.
That's it. But you've always got this mitigated risk, but you should feel confident and be comfortable enough that you've done enough research, you've done enough analysis, you've talked to enough people to be comfortable with that and go, okay, yeah, let's give it a shot. And I think things have changed a lot since COVID because it's so competitive these days. And there's a younger generation coming up in the company. They're maybe a little bit less risk adverse. Some of the older people can be a little bit more risk adverse. You need to know who your team is, and you need to know who are kind of the first movers within the team, who are a little bit more comfortable and who are not so comfortable. Balance that, but you need to take responsibility for all of that as the leader. And in the end, it's you need to take that risk so that that team is protected and feels comfortable.
What about as a woman leading in Japan? Any advice for other women who might be thinking of stepping up or taking on a role, not sure whether they should do it or not? What advice would you give them?
It's a good question. To be honest, I don't think about it that much. Of course, I've run into challenges. I think any woman has. But I feel that if I think about it too much or if I take it personally, I get diverted from the task. So I think most women are always going to be aware if there's that sort of challenge. I will always, if that happens, I'll try and partner them with a guy in the team or something like that. Find a way that I can kind of go over that sort of obstacle, but make sure that person is comfortable too. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions.
So how do you feel, and I'm sure this is the case, you go into meetings, you're the only woman.
Yep.
Well, first of all, you'd definitely be the only foreigner.
Uh-huh.
So just put that foreigner thing straight over here. But you're still probably the only woman.
Mm-hmm.
All guys, probably a lot older than you.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese, decades of experience, and
Mm-hmm.
You turn up.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get credibility? How do you get taken seriously?
I believe the way I establish credibility, I introduce myself properly. First of all, I've been here in Japan for a decade. I'm not just here on a three-year term. So I've been here. I'll use Japanese and English so people will understand that I can understand both
Mm-hmm.
languages. And I'll talk a little bit just about what I've done in my role, so they know what I've done, what I haven't, where they stand. In terms of that, not where they stand, but what I can answer and what I can't, essentially. And then after I establish that credibility, I'm always just polite and respectful to everyone. And especially because I'm often using Japanese, not English, I try to be as direct as possible, so that there's no confusion. If I don't understand anything, I will say it, and I check my understanding to make sure that it's clear that we've communicated effectively. I always fall back on that, to be honest, and it's protected me so far. Just being polite, courteous, respectful, and being very clear in communication.
We say it's lonely at the top.
Mm-hmm.
When you're the boss, you can't really explain it to your spouse because they're not working in the business usually. You can't share your problems with your subordinates because they're your subordinates.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell your boss because your boss doesn't care. And who do you talk to? In your case, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about it's lonely at the top. It's totally lonely at the top. So how do you deal with that? You've got bound to have imposter syndrome, doubts, you've got problems, you've got stress, you've got pressure. How have you learned to deal with it?
I'm very lucky that I have a very solid team back in Adelaide that I can talk to. And particularly because they're often working in other markets, so maybe the Americas, the UK, East Asia. I might say, look, I'm trying to figure out how to do this. What have you done in other markets that worked? If you're in my shoes, is there something that worked really well here that you think could work in Japan? So that's kind of like a really constructive way that I can talk about that conversation. Another way is I'm very lucky as well that we have very close contact with the Australian Embassy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a wonderful team there with Austrade. I know if I'm like, I'm not entirely sure about this idea. What do you think? Like, is there something that you think could work a little bit better? Is there a way that you would approach this problem?
Because often people,
Mm-hmm.
and you're seeing it in America now, they're gutting their entire administration, the government apparatus,
Yeah.
because it's not seen as valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And people can sometimes bring this sort of anti-government mentality into this country.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't realise, though, is that those people in Austrade or in those positions have been there for decades.
Yeah.
Decades.
Yeah.
And I used to work in Austrade, so I know very well they've got deep relationships and broad relationships with the industry, depending on where the industry vertical is, their specialities. They're connected.
Mm-hmm.
Connected in a way you'll never be connected because you just haven't been here that long in that one vertical. So, if I'd recommend to anyone who's in business, governments will differ, embassies will differ, but if you can get hold of those people to work with you and help you, there's a lot of value in those people.
Hugely. And I don't mind saying sometimes when I'm looking at something and I'm like, I really don't know how to communicate this in a good way. And I have at least one person in my mind who I can reach out to who has, almost 2 decades of experience. She's Japanese, so she understands the target very, very well. And I can say, how can I communicate this in a way that people will be comfortable and they all feel reassured that we've looked at everything we need to look at. And that's invaluable because those day-to-day communications with maybe importers or maybe with companies, it does really matter that you get the communication right and that you show that you're working together as well so they feel more comfortable in what you're doing. It's invaluable, as you say.
And what's your definition of leadership?
Oh, yeah. So I did have a good think about this one. I'm still in the early stages of my leadership journey, I would say, but I have 2 people in mind that I think of when I think of leaders who succeeded in Japan, and they're both Western. And when I think of how they conducted themselves as leaders, you could really define that they had mutual respect with their team. They were both very professional, but very sort of open. You could easily talk to them about something. If they were working on a project, or let's say that there's a crisis or something, you could see that they could call together their team. They would look at the problem in a very analytical way. What's the context? What happened? How do we fix it? Having a very direct and honest conversation about, okay, where are we and how do we fix this? And then they trusted their team to do their job to the best of their ability. And that team was trusting them as leaders. So you could see that they had built that sort of mutual respect. So when you ask me that question, what's my definition of leadership, that they really pop into my mind. So it's that sort of mutual respect between the leader and the team, and they both work together in that way.
Well, thank you very much, Rose, on that note.
No problem.
Thank you. And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.